Hi, it's Scott Vogel on sex addiction. I'm going to share with you the 5 biggest problems a sex addict faces. Like most other addictions, sex addiction comes with a great many serious problems. And these problems usually result in some pretty extreme consequences, socially, emotionally, physically, legally, and financially, if not taken care of. The first area that affects individuals with sex addiction is in their social lives. Sex addiction isolates the addict from every single person around them, since the addiction itself becomes the primary focus of their entire life. And it creates a lot of social problems as a result. Now, if the person's in a relationship, that relationship will definitely be affected and in turmoil. Feelings of isolation and abandonment and inadequacy, guilt and embarrassment, and even anger will be present at one point or another throughout the addiction and recovery process. There's also other relationships that will suffer, other social relationships, family members, friends, co-workers. The addict so isolates him or herself from everyone to focus on the sexually compulsive and obsessive behaviors, and they escalate and the isolation goes deeper. Now what has to happen is the pattern has to be changed, the habits have to be broken, and that takes time and effort to help restore the neglected and oftentimes broken relationships. So a social life is very important for any healthy human being, and the addict will need to find a strong social support system to help in their recovery, which is usually available in the 12-step fellowships of Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous. The second problem that sex addictions face affects them emotionally. Sex addicts have a wide range of troubling emotions. They usually experience emotions such as anxiety and anger and frustration. There's a great deal of stress in an addict's life that causes them to act out. There's a tremendous amount of shame due to the acting out behaviors. There's a lot of guilt because of what they do. And there's the fear of discovery. These are all common emotions that they experience through the entire process. Now, in order for the sex addict to have successful recovery, they really need to address their emotional problems effectively. It seems that underlying feelings and emotions that don't have the ability to come out end up coming out in acting out. And the shame and the guilt are among the most prevalent emotions found in sex addicts because they're struggling with an addiction which contradicts their moral and spiritual beliefs. As much as a sex addict wants to be normal, their true beliefs say otherwise. This causes very, very strong feelings of shame and guilt and keeps them in the addictive cycle, in the spiral, because the more shame and guilt they feel, the more they want to feel better, the more they act out. In addition, boredom, fatigue, and despair can envelop in the addict, and that creates a struggle that keeps going on and on. And for some, unfortunately, that struggle can lead to suicide because the disease of sex addiction is so powerful with the shame and the guilt. The third way that sex addiction affects an individual is physically. The addict sometimes will engage in risky sexual behavior, and that can expose them to a number of physical problems. And those are related to sexually transmitted infections and sexually transmitted diseases and physical injury. There's been a lot of people who masturbate too much and end up with genital injuries. There's possibilities of cervical cancer, HIV, AIDS, herpes, genital warts, and a lot of other STDs are common among sex addicts. In some cases, the addict's desire may even put them in harm's way, resulting in physical injury or sometimes even death. See, many sex addicts spend so much time in their unwanted sexual behaviors, they lose sleep, they don't eat right, they don't exercise, their nutrition is affected. This in itself, over time, takes a great toll on the body. And when an addict punishes themselves for doing all this, they put themselves in more risky situations. And unfortunately, their ability to put the brakes on disappears. They become so intent on getting their fix, they'll go places they never thought they'd go. They'll sleep with people they never dreamed they would, and take risks that carry with them extreme danger. Oftentimes, the lust for the sex escalates to a point where the rush and the high of the experience become so intense, and then after the danger, the addict crashes hard. And at times, there's physical abuse and physical hurt to the individual. The fourth way that the sex addict is affected is legally. Sex addiction can definitely result in the addict breaking the law. Addicts will often engage in things like sexual harassment or obscene phone calls, exhibitionism, voyeurism, prostitution, rape, incest, and child molestation. All of these are against the law. And it has become more and more prevalent because of the ease of access and the availability of chat rooms to be able to go in and find the perfect fantasy for the sex addict. With instant messaging, with social media, sex addicts can prey on members of the opposite sex or the same sex, and a lot of times underage children. And as this disease progresses, some sex addicts will want to escalate and intensify their behaviors and break the law because they have a need to engage in illegal activities. And I'll ask you this, is that sane? Is that healthy? No, it's the disease that's causing the person to do that. And as the need to act out sexually escalates, addicts will commit crimes they wouldn't ordinarily consider. And it's difficult because sometimes people will say, I will never do that. But because of the disease, the filter to say no and stop is broken. The fifth problem that an addict faces is their work and finances. People who struggle with sex addiction put their lives on hold. They'll put their addiction ahead of everything. They show up late for work, they call out sick from work, they might get in trouble flirting at work or being sexually inappropriate, they neglect their responsibilities, they miss deadlines, and they act irrationally while on the job because they're so exhausted from living the life of sexually acting out, they have trouble focusing on anything else, and they go through life in a zombie-like state. Now, this behavior can affect their productivity, and they take more risks at work, and it can lead to job loss. And to make matters worse, they'll spend a lot of money on pornography, adult phone services, cam chat rooms, prostitution, and other costly sexual activities. The combination of a job loss and excessive spending to fuel the sex addiction can lead to serious financial problems. Not only can you measure that loss in dollars spent on the addiction, but you have to take into consideration the hours spent acting out sexually, and for many the opportunity cost of what could have been accomplished while they were acting out. So, as you can see, a sex addict has a lot of problems to overcome, aside from just the addiction itself. We're dealing with, as we mentioned, socially, their relationships get ruined. Emotionally, they feel all these bad feelings of anxiety and stress and fear and being discovered. Physically, it takes a toll on their body from not sleeping and potentially hurting themselves. and endangering their lives. Legally, many escalate to the point where they commit crimes against society. And then financially, it takes its toll because the addict only wants to act out. This is a serious disease. Visit our YouTube channel on sex addiction for more videos on sex addiction and recovery from sex addiction. Go to onsexaddiction.com for a free video explaining what sex addiction is, the 7 symptoms of sex addiction, the 4 traumas of sex addiction, and the 4 faulty core beliefs set up by those 4 traumas of sex addiction. And of course, the solution, recovery from sex addiction, the 7 paths to success. You'll also find more information, articles, and videos about sex addiction and sex addiction recovery. This is Scott Vogel on Sex Addiction.